I am Julian. I am 35 years old. 3 years ago, the very people who were supposed to protect me completely destroyed my life. My own younger brother stole my fiancée, and my parents actively helped him do it, orchestrating the betrayal behind my back. While I was standing in our childhood home, trying to process the ultimate betrayal and feeling my entire world collapse into absolute nothingness, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said the most heartless thing a parent could ever say. She told me that sometimes love just happens, and she demanded that I stop making a scene because I was ruining their perfect holiday aesthetic. They laughed at my pain in front of 20 extended family members at our annual Thanksgiving dinner, treating my shattered life and my broken heart like a minor inconvenience to their picturesque evening. They looked at me like I was the villain for being hurt. But there is one massive thing they did not know. The struggling, humiliated son they gleefully chased out of town is now the quiet owner of the very real estate and restaurant empire they rely on to maintain their fake high society image. I hold the deed to the building where my brother works. I own the luxury restaurants where they boast to their country club friends. And tonight, they are about to beg for a mercy they never showed me. Before I tell you exactly how it all went down and how I took back my power, hit that like button if you truly believe in karma. And please, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Now, let us go back to the night where this nightmare finally met its absolute reckoning. The familiar, heavy weight of the thick cardstock invitation in my tailored coat pocket felt infinitely heavier as I pulled my black Porsche into the valet lane of Meridian Heights. The crisp, biting autumn wind whipped fiercely against my face as I stepped out of the warm, quiet leather interior of my car. The street was bustling with the elite of the city, people wrapped in expensive wool coats and designer scarves, hurrying to their reservations. I handed my keys to a young valet named Tommy. I knew his name because I hired him. Tommy immediately subtly widened his eyes when he recognized my face from the internal corporate memos circulated to all staff. I gave him a curt, silent nod, a clear, unspoken instruction to keep his mouth shut and maintain his professional composure. I walked up the grand, sweeping marble steps of the restaurant. Every single inch of this place, from the brass railings to the imported Italian stone, was born from my sweat, my tears, and my endless sleepless nights. But as I reached the top of the stairs, my blood ran completely cold. I saw them. My younger brother, Donovan, was positioning himself like a cheap, aggressive bouncer at the massive, ornate glass doors of the restaurant. Standing right next to him, clutching his arm with a suffocating, possessive grip that I used to think meant she loved him, was Clara, my ex-fiancée, the woman I had planned to spend the rest of my life with, the woman I had worked double shifts for just to buy a ring that she ultimately threw back in my face. The sound of clinking crystal glasses, polite, hushed laughter, and soft, expensive live jazz drifted from inside the upscale establishment. I knew this place better than anyone on the face of the earth. This was the exact spot where I had once planned to celebrate my engagement to Clara 3 years ago, right before my world completely collapsed and I was violently forced to rebuild my entire life from the absolute ashes of their betrayal. "You cannot seriously think you are welcome here," Donovan said, stepping forward to block my path. His voice immediately dropped to that condescending, mocking tone I remembered so vividly from our childhood, the tone he always used when he wanted to remind me that he was the favorite. He puffed out his chest, aggressively adjusting the lapels of his rented tuxedo. It did not fit him right. It bunched terribly at the shoulders, a clear sign of a cheap rental. "This is Meridian Heights, Julian. The wine pairing alone tonight costs more than you probably make in an entire month. You have no business being anywhere near a place like this." I looked at him. I really looked at him for the first time in 3 long, grueling years. He had that smug, utterly entitled smirk plastered across his face. It was the exact same arrogant smirk he always wore when he knew our parents were standing right behind him to catch him if he fell. If he only knew the actual truth. If he only knew that I had personally selected those exact, expensive wine pairings with my head sommelier during our marathon menu renovation meeting last Tuesday afternoon. "It is Mom's birthday dinner," I said. My voice was incredibly steady, surprised even me. I did not feel the burning rage I thought I would. I just felt a cold, calculated emptiness when looking at them. The small, soft velvet box in my coat pocket contained the keys to a luxury lakefront cabin in the Hamptons. It was one of the most exclusive private retreat properties in the entire state. I had intended to give it to her. I had intended to offer an olive branch, to see if time had softened their cruelty. Mom and Dad were very specific about tonight, Clara chimed in, her voice dripping with fake concern. She checked her reflection in the heavy glass doors, frantically smoothing down her emerald cocktail dress. It was a cheap knockoff. It was a very poor, embarrassing imitation of a preliminary sketch my personal designer friend in Milan had shown me over coffee just a few weeks ago. The stitching was uneven, and the fabric lacked the heavy drape of true luxury silk. They only want successful people here tonight, Julian. People who will not embarrass the family in front of their important friends. She paused, her eyes slowly scanning my simple, meticulously tailored black suit with obvious disgust, completely missing the absolute mastery of the cut and the unparalleled quality of the fabric. People who have actually moved on with their lives and made something of themselves. Not people still living in the past, struggling to pay their basic rent. The sheer irony of her words was thick enough to choke on. Just 24 hours ago, I had sat in a massive boardroom and signed the final legal paperwork on a $150 million expansion of the Meridian Hospitality Group. I was the CEO. I was the absolute sole founder. I owned the massive crystal chandeliers they were currently standing under, the imported marble they were standing on, and the paychecks of every single person working inside this building. Yet, here I was, standing in the freezing cold, being told by a man in a poorly fitted rented suit and a hollow woman in a fake dress that I was far too much of a financial embarrassment to enter my own flagship location. I brought a gift, I said quietly, pulling the velvet box halfway out of my pocket so they could see the luxurious material. Donovan let out a loud, barking, aggressive laugh that turned a few heads on the sidewalk. A gift? What is it, Julian? A $20 gift card to some fast food joint? Or did you scrape together enough spare change and tips from whatever dive bar you are managing to buy her a scented candle from the discount aisle at the pharmacy? I stared directly into his eyes. The sheer audacity and staggering ignorance of his existence was baffling. It is something she will appreciate. It is substantial. Clara shook her head, looking at me with what I could only describe as extremely fake, manufactured pity. Julian, please, do not do this to yourself. It is pathetic. We all know you struggled terribly after the breakup. We know you left town because you could not handle watching Donovan succeed where you completely failed. But coming here to a place like this, trying desperately to pretend you belong with high society, it is just sad. Go home. Preserve whatever tiny shred of dignity you have left. For a brief, fleeting second, I considered turning around. I considered getting back into my warm car, driving back to my secure penthouse, and leaving them to their pathetic, manufactured reality. I considered letting them live safely in their delusion of grandeur for the rest of their miserable lives. But then, I deeply remembered the agonizing, sleepless nights I spent wondering what was fundamentally wrong with me. I remembered the intense therapy sessions. I remembered the crushing, suffocating weight of being discarded like actual garbage by the very people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. No, I was absolutely not going to walk away. Not this time. They owed me a debt, and tonight I was collecting with heavy interest. The heavy glass doors suddenly swung open with a smooth, silent glide. Victor, my head of corporate security, stepped out into the crisp evening air. Victor was a massive, imposing man, impeccably dressed in a tailored dark suit. He had a military background and a gaze that could melt steel. He had been with me since the very beginning, since I bought my first failing diner 5 years ago. He knew my grueling struggles, he knew my deep pain, and he knew exactly who the pathetic people standing in front of me were. Is everything all right out here, boss? Victor asked. His deep, resonant voice echoed loudly across the entrance, slicing cleanly through Donovan's smug, annoying laughter like a freshly sharpened machete. Donovan froze instantly, His laughter died in his throat. Clara's jaw went completely slack, her eyes darting between me and the giant of a man who just called me boss. The silence that rapidly fell over the restaurant entrance was absolutely deafening. But Victor's sudden appearance was only the initial match that lit the fuse. To truly understand the massive, all-consuming inferno that was about to completely obliterate my family, you have to understand the toxic fuel they had been actively pouring on my life for years. I thought the worst was over when I walked up those marble steps tonight. I was so incredibly wrong. To fully grasp the magnitude of tonight, we have to go back to Thanksgiving dinner, exactly 3 years ago. The rich, heavy smell of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and expensive red wine completely filled my parents' sprawling, meticulously decorated suburban home. The massive formal dining room was packed to the absolute brim with 20 people. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and lifelong family friends were all gathered around the long, antique oak table. The stone fireplace was roaring. The expensive crystal glasses were gleaming in the low light, and on the surface, it looked exactly like a scene straight out of a perfect, highly curated holiday catalog. I was sitting quietly near the far end of the table, slowly nursing a glass of strong bourbon, feeling a strange, suffocating, invisible tension hanging heavy in the air that I could not quite place. Everyone seemed on edge, exchanging secret, knowing glances that completely excluded me. Clara was sitting directly across from me. We had been happily engaged for exactly 6 months. We were supposed to be deeply in the trenches of planning our dream wedding, looking at expensive waterfront venues, and discussing the beautiful, secure future we were going to build together. I had spent 2 grueling years saving for her custom diamond ring. I worked brutal double shifts at a high-end restaurant, managing the kitchen and the floor. I sacrificed sleep, weekends, and holidays. I sacrificed absolutely everything just to give her the comfortable life she always said she wanted. But lately, she had been incredibly distant, cold, and irritable. She claimed she was overly stressed with her mid-level corporate job, overwhelmed with the massive wedding planning, and just needed some space to breathe and think. I gave it to her without question, foolishly trusting the woman I had loved unconditionally for 4 long years. Donovan sat proudly at the head of the table, right next to our father, Richard. Donovan was the undisputed, golden child of the family. He was the star quarterback in high school, the highly charismatic fraternity president in college, the golden boy heading straight to a highly prestigious, incredibly expensive law school that my parents happily funded. My parents worshipped the very ground he walked on. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, independent older brother. I was the one who firmly skipped the traditional, expensive college route to work in hot, greasy kitchens, learning the brutal hospitality business from the ground up because it was my true, undeniable passion. In my family's deeply elitist eyes, a chef or a restaurant manager was absolutely nothing more than glorified domestic help. A lawyer, however, was a king. Halfway through the heavy dinner, right as my mother was proudly serving the extravagant dessert, Donovan stood up. He picked up his crystal wine glass and loudly tapped his heavy silver spoon against it, instantly commanding the entire room's attention with his usual, obnoxious theatrical flair. "Family," Donovan started, flashing that highly practiced, completely fake $1 million smile. "I have a massive, wonderful announcement to make tonight. It is something I have been keeping a secret for a little while, but I absolutely cannot hide it anymore. I am just too incredibly happy to keep it to myself." I smiled across the table, genuinely happy for my little brother. I assumed he had finally landed that massive, high-paying summer internship he had been endlessly bragging about, or perhaps he had passed some rigorous preliminary bar exam early. Donovan reached his hand across the wide table. Clara reached out without hesitation and took it, her fingers intertwined with his. She did not look at me. She kept her eyes glued tightly to the expensive linen tablecloth, her face completely unreadable. "Clara and I are deeply in love," Donovan said loudly, his voice echoing violently in the sudden, dead, horrifying silence of the dining room. "We are together, and we are getting married." The room instantly started spinning wildly out of control. I felt like I had been hit squarely in the chest by a massive freight train. My ears rang with a deafening, high-pitched screech that drowned out the crackling fire. I looked desperately across the table at Clara, begging her silently to look up, begging her to laugh and say this was some kind of sick, twisted, horrible joke. She finally looked up, her eyes cold, distant, and completely unapologetic. She squeezed Donovan's hand tightly, confirming my absolute worst nightmare. I stood up so fast and so violently that my heavy wooden chair crashed backward onto the hardwood floor, the loud sound echoing like a gunshot through the silent house. "What the hell is this?" I demanded. My voice was shaking uncontrollably, but the deep, primal, blinding anger was rising fast in my chest. "Clara, you are engaged to me. We are getting married in 6 months." My mother, Beatrice, immediately stood up, waving her heavily manicured hands frantically, as if I were a spoiled toddler throwing a massive tantrum in a grocery store. "Julian, please, calm down this instant. Do not make a scene in front of all the guests. You are ruining the dinner." "Do not make a scene?" I repeated, staring in absolute, sheer horror at the woman who gave birth to me. "My own brother just announced he is marrying my fiancée. A Thanksgiving dinner. Are you all completely out of your minds?" My father violently slammed his heavy hand hard on the table, aggressively rattling the expensive silverware and crystal glasses. "Watch your tone in my house, Julian. Your brother is incredibly brave for coming forward with his truth today. We have known about this for a few weeks now." Clara realized she made a terrible, life-altering mistake. She wants a man with a real future, a highly stable salary, someone who can actually provide for her long-term. Donovan is going to be a top-tier corporate lawyer. You are just flipping burgers in a kitchen. You cannot provide the life she truly deserves. The betrayal hit me from 3 entirely different sides simultaneously, tearing my soul apart. My own brother, my fiancé, my parents. They knew. They had all known this sick, twisted secret, and they actively let me sit at this table, eating their food, totally oblivious, like a complete, pathetic fool. Aunt Vivian, my mother's bitter, wealthy sister and the family's resident toxic gossip, chimed in from the corner of the room, casually sipping her wine as if she were watching a mildly entertaining television show. "Honestly, Julian, you should be happy for them. Clara is practically family already. It would be a terrible, awful shame to lose her just because you completely lack basic ambition. Maybe this huge, necessary wake-up call will finally motivate you to get a real job instead of playing restaurant all day." I looked around the packed, silent room. Not a single person was looking at me with an ounce of pity, empathy, or basic human decency. They looked at me with severe, unfiltered annoyance. I was completely ruining the aesthetic of their perfect holiday photos. I was the annoying obstacle standing in the way of their golden boy's ultimate happiness. "You are all incredibly, deeply sick," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, deadly whisper. I threw my linen napkin onto the ruined table. I turned around without another word and walked swiftly out of the dining room, heading straight to the coat closet in the main hallway. Clara immediately followed me out, her expensive heels clicking loudly on the polished floor. "Julian, be reasonable for once in your miserable life," she whispered fiercely, her voice laced with heavy, genuine annoyance rather than any shred of guilt. "It is not my fault you never grew up. I need absolute financial security. I want a massive house in the wealthy suburbs, a massive college fund for my future kids, a husband with a robust 401k, and a real, highly respectable career. You work 80 grueling hours a week and have absolutely nothing to show for it. Donovan is my future. You are just a stepping stone I outgrew." "Donovan is a parasitic, arrogant fraud," I spat back, aggressively grabbing my heavy winter coat from the hanger. "And you absolutely deserve each other. Enjoy your miserable life." I walked out of that house and drove straight into the freezing, dark, unforgiving November night. I gripped the cold leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark, dead white. My own mother, my own father, they had actively, willingly chosen their golden boy's happiness over my basic human dignity. They did not just break my heart that night. They tried to completely, utterly obliterate my spirit and my worth as a man. That night, sitting entirely alone in my freezing, cheap studio apartment, staring at the peeling paint on the wall, I made a solemn, unbreakable vow. I would never ever beg for a seat at their toxic table again. I would build my own massive table, and when they finally realized what I had become, I would make sure they could not even afford the crumbs that fell from it. But the grueling, exhausting road to building my empire was paved with even more brutal, unexpected betrayal. And the very next knife in my back came from the one single person outside my toxic family I genuinely thought I could implicitly trust. The next 3 years of my life were a total blur of absolute, unyielding, almost terrifying obsession. I quickly packed up my meager belongings, left New York entirely, and moved further up the coast to a city where nobody knew my name. I took every single penny of my life savings, maxed out 3 high-interest credit cards, and bought a failing, severely dilapidated diner sitting on a highly prime piece of commercial real estate downtown. The place was a disaster, but the location was pure gold. I lived in the tiny, unventilated, windowless office directly above the greasy kitchen. I slept on a hard canvas cot. I worked from 4 in the morning until past midnight every single day, mastering every single aspect of the hospitality industry. I became the chef, the accountant, the marketer, and the janitor. I did not just fix that diner. I completely, aggressively transformed it. I rebranded it into a highly exclusive, upscale bistro catering to the city's elite. Within a single year, the profit margins were absolutely staggering. The demand was off the charts. I used that massive financial leverage to secure a huge commercial business loan from a private investment firm and immediately bought 2 more struggling restaurant locations in wealthy, highly populated neighborhoods. I was relentless. I was a machine. The agonizing, searing pain of my family's betrayal was a roaring furnace burning deep in my chest, and I used it as endless, unlimited fuel to push myself far beyond normal human limits. But rapid, explosive corporate growth always brings dangerous sharks to the water. And one of those highly dangerous sharks was Greg. Greg was my former college roommate and the guy I had loyally brought on as my chief financial officer when things started getting seriously big. Greg knew all the internal numbers. He knew my grand, sweeping vision for statewide expansion. And most importantly, he had full access to my corporate secrets. As I was aggressively preparing to launch the flagship location of Meridian Heights, the absolute crown jewel of my rapidly emerging empire, I found myself locked in a brutal, cutthroat, highly publicized bidding war for a massive commercial property right in the heart of downtown. It was the absolute perfect location. It was destiny. My biggest competitor was a ruthless, seasoned, highly connected real estate developer named Silas. Silas had incredibly deep pockets and a reputation for crushing small business owners, but I had a far better vision and a much hungrier drive. One late Tuesday night, I walked back into the corporate office to grab some urgent architectural files I had forgotten. The large office was supposed to be completely empty, but as I walked down the hall, I saw a light on. I found Greg hastily, frantically printing highly confidential documents from my secure private server. He jumped nearly out of his skin, dropping a stack of papers, when the bright fluorescent lights flicked on. "Just running some late-night financial projections, Julian," Greg stammered, his eyes darting nervously, guiltily toward the exit door. He was sweating profusely, his tie loosened. I did not say a single word. The silence in the room was suffocating. I walked slowly across the carpeted floor, took the warm papers directly from the printer tray, and read them. They were my absolute maximum bid limits for the downtown commercial property, along with highly confidential, proprietary architectural plans and exclusive vendor contracts. "You are selling me out to Silas," I stated quietly. It was not a question. It was a cold, hard, undeniable fact. Greg's face completely crumpled in absolute defeat. "Julian, man, you have to try and understand my position here. Silas offered me a massive, life-changing cash payout. a guaranteed high-level executive salary at his massive firm. You are flying way too close to the sun with this aggressive expansion. This company is eventually going to crash and burn under the debt, and I desperately need a secure safety net. I have a huge mortgage. I have a family to feed. I cannot risk going down with your sinking ship. 3 years ago, sitting at that horrific Thanksgiving table, I would have yelled. I would have felt the deep, agonizing sting of betrayal and walked away incredibly hurt, broken, and defeated. But the soft, naive man who left that dinner was dead and buried. The man standing in this office was cold, highly calculating, and absolutely terrifyingly merciless in business. I understand completely, Greg, I said quietly, my voice completely devoid of any emotion or anger. I gently put the papers back down on the desk. Pack up your desk immediately. Get out of my building right now, and never show your face here again. He looked genuinely, deeply surprised. He expected a massive fight. He expected me to beg or threaten him. When he scurried out the door like a frightened, pathetic rat, leaving his office key on the desk, I immediately picked up my phone and called my elite, highly aggressive legal team. What Greg, in his infinite blind greed, did not know was that I had suspected a corporate leak for several weeks. The financial bid limits printed on those papers were entirely fake. I had intentionally fed him a dummy file, waiting to see if he would take the bait. He swallowed it whole. When the highly anticipated blind auction happened the very next day, Silas arrogantly bid exactly $1 over my fake maximum limit, thinking he had effortlessly won the war. I swooped in with my real, heavily backed corporate financing, completely blindsiding him in front of the entire city council, and secured the massive property without breaking a sweat. Silas looked like he was going to have a stroke. Then I turned my full, undivided attention to Greg. I hit him with a massive, crippling, multi-million-dollar corporate espionage lawsuit. He had blatantly, stupidly breached his ironclad non-disclosure agreement. My lawyers were absolutely ruthless. I systematically stripped him of his company shares, completely ruined his professional reputation in the financial sector so no one would ever hire him again, and left him with absolutely nothing but a towering mountain of legal debt and a completely shattered career. I learned my lesson the hard way. Loyalty is a total myth. Trust must be earned every single day, but absolute control must be ruthlessly taken. Fast forward to today. Meridian Hospitality was an unstoppable corporate beast. I fully owned 42 premium dining establishments and luxury resort properties across 5 different states. The heartbroken, pathetic ex-fiancée they laughed at was now a highly feared, deeply respected hospitality mogul. My personal net worth was a number my father could not even begin to comprehend in his wildest, most ambitious dreams. I had entirely severed all ties with my toxic family. I had not spoken to them in 3 years. Until this very morning. My secure private phone buzzed loudly on my massive mahogany desk. It was a text message from my mother. Julian, Aunt Vivian said she saw you walking around in the city yesterday. Do not even think about coming to dinner tonight. It is at Meridian Heights. You absolutely cannot afford it, and they have a strict dress code. Seeing Donovan and Clara happily together will just upset you, and we do not want you ruining the celebratory mood with your depression. Do not make this harder on yourself. Stay away. I stared at the glowing screen for a long, quiet time. I was sitting in my sprawling penthouse office, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows over the vast, glittering city skyline. I owned the entire commercial building I was sitting in. I owned the very luxury restaurant she was so arrogantly bragging about. I slowly opened my locked desk drawer and pulled out the small velvet box. Inside rested the shiny keys to the Hampton cabin. I had originally bought it under a dummy holding company, intending to secretly gift it to my parents years ago before the ultimate betrayal. It was a foolish, childish dream of a desperate son wanting to literally buy his parents' elusive love and approval, hoping that wealth would finally make them respect me. I snapped the box closed and slipped it into my tailored coat pocket. I was absolutely not going to give them the luxury house, but I was going to give them a brutal, unforgettable, deeply humiliating reality check. I pressed the intercom button for my assistant. Clear my entire evening schedule. Cancel the board meeting. I have a family dinner to attend. I genuinely thought walking up to that restaurant tonight would bring back the crushing, suffocating pain. I thought seeing Clara's face would violently hurt my chest. But standing outside those heavy glass doors, listening to their pathetic, weak insults, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, heavy, thrilling anticipation. The massive hurricane was finally coming, and they were standing proudly right in the absolute center of the strike zone, completely unaware of the absolute devastation heading their way. "You really need to leave right now, Julian," Clara said, tightly crossing her arms across her chest. The cheap, highly synthetic fabric of her dress bunched awkwardly at the shoulders. "We have the highly exclusive Wellington room explicitly reserved for the entire evening. It is for immediate family and highly distinguished guests only. Not people who hold petty grudges and can't manage to let go of the past." Before I could even formulate a response to her sheer audacity, a sleek, black Mercedes sedan pulled up aggressively to the curb, tires screeching slightly. My mother, Beatrice, and my father, Richard, stepped out. My mother was absolutely dripping in gaudy costume jewelry, trying her absolute hardest to look like she belonged to the old money elite of the city. My father wore a stiff, highly uncomfortable suit that was easily 10 years out of style, though it was pressed to absolute perfection. They looked exactly like people desperately pretending to be wealthy. "Julian." My mother's voice was piercing and sharp, cutting right through the ambient noise of the busy city street like a siren. She marched quickly up the marble steps, her heels clicking aggressively against the stone. "What exactly are you doing standing out here? I texted you specifically this morning not to come near this place." "Hello, Mother," I said calmly, keeping my hands casually resting in my pockets. "I brought a gift for your birthday." I tapped the side of my coat pocket where the velvet box rested heavily. "Oh, please, spare us the theatrics," Donovan scoffed loudly. He draped his arm heavily and possessively around Clara's waist, looking at me with pure, unadulterated disdain. "What is it? A $20 gift card to Walmart? Or did you manage to scrape together enough tips from whatever roadside diner you are managing to buy her a cheap candle?" My father sighed heavily, aggressively rubbing the bridge of his nose as if my mere presence gave him a severe, debilitating migraine. "Julian, this is entirely inappropriate and highly embarrassing. Donovan just made senior associate at his prestigious law firm. He is handling very important, high-profile cases now, and he graciously paid a small fortune for this expensive dinner to celebrate your mother. Do not ruin this incredible night for him with your petty jealousy. Go home." I looked directly at Donovan. Senior associate. I knew exactly what his new position was. I also knew that his prestigious law firm, Harrison and Associates, was currently exactly 6 months behind on their exorbitant rent for the downtown office building they leased. My ruthless corporate property management team sent me highly detailed monthly financial reports on all commercial tenants. Donovan's firm was bleeding cash rapidly, and they were exactly one single eviction notice away from total, irreversible bankruptcy. The final eviction notice that I had sitting squarely on my desk upstairs in my office, waiting for my authorized signature first thing tomorrow morning. "Senior associate," I repeated slowly, letting the heavy words hang suspended in the freezing air. "That is incredibly impressive, Donovan. It must be a highly lucrative, highly respected position. It pays well enough to comfortably treat our parents to the absolute best restaurant in the entire city." Donovan bragged loudly, puffing out his chest again for anyone walking by to see, trying to assert dominance. "Something you would know absolutely nothing about. What is it you are actually doing now, anyway? Still washing greasy dishes upstate in some dump?" My mother stepped closer, giving my suit a highly critical, sweeping once-over, her nose wrinkled in disgust. "Honestly, Julian, if you were going to stubbornly crash my private birthday dinner, you could have at least rented a decent suit for the occasion. You look so incredibly plain. It is frankly embarrassing to have my friends see you standing near us." I casually ran my hand down the smooth lapel of my jacket. It was a completely bespoke, hand-stitched creation from a master tailor in London. The imported fabric alone cost significantly more than my father's entire car. But to narrow-minded, incredibly shallow people who only understood the loud, flashy logos of cheap, mass-market consumerism, true, quiet luxury was completely invisible. "I am in real estate management," I said smoothly, my voice completely devoid of the explosive anger they were desperately trying to provoke out of me. "I handle massive commercial properties, high-level investments, things of that nature." Aunt Vivian, who had just walked heavily up the steps behind my parents, let out a loud, obnoxious, grating cackle that echoed off the glass doors. "Real estate management? You mean you are a slumlord for a bunch of rundown, roach-infested apartments on the bad side of town? Oh, Julian, you always did know exactly how to dress up a massive failure to sound important." They all laughed loudly. It was a cruel, perfectly synchronized chorus of mockery. My mother, my father, my brother, my ex-fiancée, and my aunt. They stood proudly on the front steps of my restaurant, breathing my air, standing on my property, and they laughed at me with absolutely zero remorse. I did not flinch. I did not yell. I just watched them. I watched the way Donovan's eyes darted around nervously, desperately hoping the valet or the doorman was highly impressed by his loud, booming voice. I watched the way Clara clung to him tightly, desperate for any shred of validation that she had made the right financial choice 3 years ago when she ruined my life. I watched my parents blindly bask in the reflected, completely fake glory of their golden child, completely and utterly blind to the hollow, rotting, crumbling foundation it was built upon. I was not the weak, crying victim anymore. I was the master architect of the brutal, devastating reality they were about to violently crash into. "Well, you have had your fun?" my father said dismissively, waving his hand aggressively toward the busy street, shooing me away like a stray dog. "Now go home, Julian. We have highly important people waiting for us inside. Mr. Harrington from the bank, and the senior partners from Donovan's firm. We absolutely cannot have them seeing you lingering out here like a common vagrant. It reflects poorly on your brother." I actively suppressed a massive, genuine smile. Mr. Harrington from the bank had been frantically, desperately calling my corporate office for 3 straight weeks, practically begging my investment group to deposit our massive corporate accounts with his failing branch to save his career. And the senior partners from Donovan's firm were the very men secretly begging my lawyers for a rent extension to save their entire business. "Important people," I nodded slowly. "I see. Exactly," Donovan sneered, stepping aggressively closer to try and physically intimidate me. "People way out of your league. Now beat it before I have the security team throw you out into the street." That was the exact, perfect moment the heavy glass doors opened again. But this time it was not just Victor standing there. It was Marcel, the general manager of Meridian Heights, flanked closely by 2 impeccably dressed hosts. Marcel was a notoriously strict perfectionist, a man who ran the front of the house with absolute military precision, and he reported directly to me. Marcel saw the large group standing aggressively on the steps. He saw Donovan pointing a threatening finger directly at my chest. And then, Marcel's eyes locked onto mine. The color instantly drained from Marcel's face. He immediately shoved aggressively past Donovan, practically knocking my stunned brother aside, and rushed frantically down the steps toward me. "Sir," Marcel said, his voice trembling slightly as he executed a crisp, deep, highly respectful bow in front of everyone. "We had absolutely no idea you were coming tonight. Why didn't you call ahead? I would have cleared the front entrance immediately." My family froze instantly. The smug, arrogant smiles vanished completely, replaced by utter, paralyzing confusion. The storm had finally made landfall, and they had absolutely nowhere to run. Marcel, my highly trained and impeccably dressed general manager, remained bowed at a precise 45-degree angle on the cold marble steps of the restaurant. The sheer, undeniable level of absolute respect he was showing me in front of the entire bustling city street was something my toxic family had never, in their entire miserable lives, witnessed being directed at anyone. let alone the son they had universally deemed a total, irredeemable failure. To them, I was the black sheep, the outcast, the culinary school dropout who was not smart enough to become a lawyer like their precious golden boy. And yet, here was a man who managed one of the most exclusive dining establishments on the East Coast, bowing to me as if I were royalty. My younger brother, Donovan, literally stumbled backward in sheer shock. His shiny, cheap rental shoes scuffed loudly against the pristine imported Italian stone of the steps. He looked frantically at Marcel, then at me, then back at Marcel again. His face was twisted into a bizarre, highly entertaining mixture of absolute, paralyzing confusion and rapidly rising panic. He aggressively reached out and grabbed Marcel by the shoulder of his custom-tailored suit. It was a massive, unforgivable breach of basic high society etiquette, and it made Victor, my imposing head of security, instantly step forward. Victor had a dark, highly threatening look in his eye, his massive shoulders tensing under his jacket. I simply held up a single, calm finger, silently signaling Victor to stand down and hold his position. I wanted this highly anticipated moment to play out completely naturally. I wanted them to eagerly, blindly dig their own massive graves right in front of me. "Hey, pal," Donovan barked loudly, his voice cracking slightly under the sudden, immense, crushing pressure of the situation. "I think you have the absolute wrong guy. You are making a huge mistake. This is my deadbeat older brother, Julian. He does not even have a basic reservation here tonight. He is just trying to crash our highly exclusive private family dinner because he is jealous. You need to call your security team right now and have him immediately escorted off the premises before he bothers the real, wealthy-paying customers inside." Marcel slowly, deliberately straightened his posture. He did not flinch. He smoothly, elegantly brushed Donovan's aggressive hand off his expensive suit jacket with a look of barely concealed, absolute disgust. Marcel was a seasoned, highly educated hospitality professional who had dealt with the most elite, demanding billionaires, politicians, and celebrities in the country. He absolutely despised cheap, unearned arrogance, and Donovan was the absolute poster child for it. "Sir," Marcel said, his voice dripping with an icy, highly polished professionalism that completely, utterly humiliated Donovan on the spot. "I am perfectly, entirely aware of exactly who this man is. I have known him for years. I am also perfectly aware that you and your incredibly loud party are currently blocking the main VIP entrance of this establishment. I strongly, highly suggest you step aside immediately before I have my staff remove you." My mother, Beatrice, let out a sharp, highly dramatic, deeply offended gasp. She aggressively clutched her cheap, fake costume pearls around her neck, her face turning a bright, blotchy, highly unattractive shade of red. "Excuse me? How dare you speak to my son that way? Do you have absolutely any idea who we are? My son Donovan is a senior associate at a massive, highly respected corporate law firm downtown. We are dining in your highly exclusive Wellington room tonight. We are spending thousands of dollars at your establishment this evening. I will absolutely be speaking directly to the owner of this restaurant about your horrible, deeply disrespectful attitude. You will be fired by tomorrow morning." Marcel looked directly at my mother. His expression did not change a single millimeter. It was a cold, unreadable mask of pure, solid stone. "Madam, I am the general manager of this specific flagship location. I run the day-to-day operations, and you are currently actively speaking to the chief executive officer, the sole founder, and the absolute owner of the entire Meridian Hospitality Group. You are standing on his personal, privately owned property. He does not need a reservation. He owns the building." The silence that immediately followed his calm statement was not just quiet. It was a heavy, suffocating, absolute vacuum. It was the exact kind of terrifying silence that happens right before a massive, towering building completely collapses in a controlled demolition. The ambient noise of the city traffic seemed to entirely fade away. Clara took a full, unsteady, highly panicked step away from Donovan. Her eyes were absolutely huge, darting frantically from my custom Italian bespoke suit, to Marcel's highly respectful posture, and then finally to the massive, imposing figure of Victor standing behind me like an impenetrable fortress. The cheap, poorly stitched knockoff emerald dress she was wearing suddenly looked exactly like what it truly was. A desperate, pathetic, highly embarrassing attempt to look wealthy on a tight budget. That is a complete, utter lie. My father, Richard, finally spat out, breaking the heavy silence. He stepped aggressively forward, trying desperately to use his physical size to intimidate my staff. A highly toxic tactic he had used his entire life to bully people into absolute submission. This is a sick, elaborate, highly coordinated prank. Julian is a failed diner cook. He does not own anything. He lives in a tiny, depressing dump upstate. Show me some actual, legal proof right now, or I am calling the city police for criminal harassment. I finally spoke. My voice was incredibly calm, exceptionally low, and completely, terrifyingly relaxed. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True power never has to shout. Marcel, is the Wellington room fully prepared for my guests this evening? Yes, Mr. Julian, Marcel replied instantly, turning his back completely on my highly confused, angry father. The private dining room is entirely ready. The executive chef has meticulously prepared the exclusive, highly complex tasting menu you personally designed and approved last week. We also have the vintage, highly rare wine pairings standing by at the correct temperatures. Excellent, I said softly. I casually adjusted my expensive silver cufflinks, letting the diamonds catch the streetlights. I looked directly at my toxic family, a pathetic group of people who currently looked like they had just seen a terrifying, undeniable ghost. Well, Mother, it is your birthday. Shall we go inside to celebrate? Or do you want to spend the rest of the freezing evening standing on the public sidewalk aggressively arguing with my highly trained staff? I did not wait for an answer. I simply walked forward with absolute purpose. The massive, heavy glass doors were instantly pulled open by the two hosts standing by. Victor flawlessly flanked my right side, and Marcel impeccably flanked my left. As I confidently walked past my stunned brother, I did not even look at him. I treated him exactly like what he was to me, an entirely invisible, completely insignificant obstacle on my path. My family followed me inside the building purely out of profound, paralyzing shock. They were entirely, utterly speechless. They walked like zombies. As we slowly walked through the grand, sprawling, highly luxurious lobby of Meridian Heights, the true, massive scale of my business empire finally began to dawn on them. The restaurant was absolutely packed to the brim with the city's elite. There were highly influential politicians, massive real estate moguls, and high-level corporate executives dining in the lavishly decorated main dining room. And every single time we passed a staff member, a busy waiter carrying a tray, a busboy clearing a table, a host greeting guests, or a bartender shaking a cocktail, they immediately stopped exactly what they were doing, stood completely straight, and greeted me by name with deep, genuine respect. Good evening, Mr. Julian. Welcome back, sir. It is an honor. Everything is running perfectly tonight, boss. With every single polite, highly respectful greeting, I could physically hear the last remaining, pathetic shreds of Donovan's fragile, inflated ego shattering into a million tiny, irreparable pieces on the imported marble floor. My mother was frantically, nervously looking around, completely overwhelmed by the sheer, unadulterated luxury and massive scale of the establishment. The massive crystal chandeliers hanging above us cost significantly more than the entire suburban house she lived in. The original, framed modern artwork on the walls was worth exponentially more than Donovan's entire, highly inflated annual salary. We finally reached the private, heavily guarded, gold-plated elevator that led directly up to the exclusive VIP dining suites on the top floor. Victor smoothly swiped a heavy black, highly encrypted keycard, and the heavy brass doors opened completely silently. We all stepped inside the spacious elevator. The suffocating tension in the small, enclosed space was incredibly thick. You could have easily cut it with a dull knife. No one dared to speak. Julian, my father started, as the elevator began its smooth, rapid ascent. His voice completely lost its usual commanding, highly arrogant edge. He suddenly sounded incredibly old. He sounded incredibly unsure of himself and deeply afraid. What exactly is going on here? How are these highly professional people treating you like you own the place? Are you involved in some kind of illegal financial scam? Because if you are dragging our family name into a massive, highly public lawsuit. I slowly, deliberately turned my head and looked directly into my father's eyes. The absolute, freezing coldness in my gaze actually made him take a physical step back until his back hit the brass wall of the elevator. Richard, I said quietly, intentionally using his first name instead of calling him Dad. The subtle disrespect was intentional, and it hit him like a massive physical blow to the chest. Do not ever, for the rest of your life, insult my intelligence, my incredible work ethic, or my absolute integrity again. I built this entire massive corporate company with my bare hands, working 100-hour weeks, while you were busy funding your golden boy's fake, completely hollow lifestyle. You are about to walk into a room filled with highly powerful people you desperately want to impress. I strongly, highly suggest you keep your mouth firmly shut and try your absolute hardest not to embarrass me in my own building. The elevator chimed loudly. The heavy brass doors slid open, revealing the highly exclusive, beautifully lit Wellington Room. The Wellington Room was an absolute masterpiece of modern, highly sophisticated interior design. It was a massive, beautifully decorated private dining space with breathtaking floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire glittering, sprawling city skyline. Incredibly long, highly polished mahogany table dominated the center of the room, set with the absolute finest heavy crystal glasses, heavy silver cutlery, and gorgeous, highly expensive floral arrangements. Standing near the fully stocked private bar, holding highly expensive drinks and laughing loudly, were the very guests my parents had desperately invited to validate their completely fake social status. There was Mr. Harrington, the senior vice president of the city's absolute largest commercial bank. And standing right next to him was Harrison, the founding senior partner of the very corporate law firm where Donovan worked. These were men of massive wealth and high influence. When they heard the elevator doors open, both powerful men immediately turned around. My parents quickly, desperately pasted on their absolute best, fakest high society smiles, getting ready to eagerly grovel for attention. Donovan puffed out his chest once again, aggressively straightening his rented tie, getting completely ready to play the highly successful, wealthy lawyer routine. But Mr. Harrington and Harrison did not look at my parents. They did not even glance at Donovan. Their eyes locked entirely, exclusively onto me. And then, the absolute most incredibly satisfying, highly vindicating moment of my entire adult life began to beautifully unfold. Both of these powerful, highly wealthy men practically shoved their expensive drinks onto a nearby table and practically sprinted across the luxurious room toward me, completely, utterly ignoring my family. They looked exactly like desperate men who had just found a massive oasis of water in a barren desert. Julian, Mr. Julian, what an absolute, incredible, unexpected honor. Mr. Harrington practically yelled, aggressively thrusting his hand forward for me to shake. He was sweating slightly on his forehead, despite the perfectly climate-controlled room. I have been leaving urgent, highly important messages with your massive corporate executive team for the past 3 straight weeks. I had absolutely no idea you were personally attending this private dinner tonight. If I had known, I would have brought the highly revised financial portfolio you requested regarding our massive loan application. Right behind him, Harrison, a highly intimidating man known for being an absolute shark in the courtroom, was nodding enthusiastically, looking at me with genuine, deep, highly evident respect. Julian, it is absolutely fantastic to see you again. The new commercial lease terms your highly aggressive property management team sent over for our downtown corporate office were incredibly brutal, but I want to officially assure you right now that we are highly committed to finding a mutual resolution. We absolutely do not want to lose that prime real estate. It is the lifeblood of our firm. My family stood completely, entirely frozen behind me. They were completely, utterly paralyzed. Their brains simply could not process the highly impossible data they were currently receiving. The highly powerful bank executive they had invited to show off their fake wealth was currently actively begging me to return his phone calls. The highly intimidating senior law partner that Donovan practically worshipped was currently groveling to me over a commercial lease. I calmly, slowly shook Mr. Harrington's hand, then Harrison's. I kept my posture entirely relaxed, projecting absolute, total dominance and control in the room. "Gentlemen," I said smoothly, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent room so every single person could hear me perfectly. "It is a pleasure to see you both. I deeply apologize for being highly difficult to reach lately. The massive, multimillion-dollar expansion of Meridian Hospitality on the West Coast has unfortunately taken up most of my schedule. But we can absolutely discuss your corporate accounts and commercial leases on Monday morning. Tonight is supposed to be a highly special celebration for my mother." I casually stepped aside, revealing my completely stunned, pale-faced, horrified family standing behind me like highly confused statues. Mr. Harrington looked extremely confused. He looked closely at my mother, then at me. "Your mother? Julian, I am so incredibly sorry. I had absolutely no idea you were related to the family. When Richard invited me, he only highly praised his son Donovan. He never mentioned you." Harrison frowned deeply, looking directly at Donovan, who was currently staring intensely at the floor, looking like he was going to violently throw up on the expensive carpet. "Wait a minute, Donovan? Donovan is your brother." Harrison looked back at me, his eyes wide with sudden, highly terrifying realization. "Julian, you own the massive commercial building our law firm operates in. Your corporate holding company is our direct, absolute landlord." The heavy, suffocating silence returned to the room. It was absolute, crushing, and completely devastating. Donovan finally raised his head. His face was a highly sickly, pale shade of green. His voice was a pathetic, highly weak whisper that barely carried across the room. You own the entire downtown office tower?" I slowly, deliberately walked over to the long mahogany table. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from a heavy crystal pitcher. I took a slow, highly deliberate sip before I answered him. I wanted to drag this exact, beautiful moment out for as long as humanly possible. "Yes, Donovan," I said clearly, my voice cold. "I bought the entire massive building 2 years ago in a highly publicized commercial real estate auction. My corporate property management division has been sending your highly struggling law firm overdue rent notices for the past 6 consecutive months. You are heavily, massively in default." I turned my absolute, cold attention directly to Harrison, the senior partner. I dropped the polite, highly professional facade completely. "Harrison, since we are all here together tonight like a big happy family, let us be completely, entirely transparent. Your law firm actively owes my holding company over $500,000 in back rent and massive late fees. Your highly praised business is failing. You are rapidly bleeding corporate clients. You are completely drowning." Harrison looked completely, entirely humiliated, but he could absolutely not deny the facts. He nodded slowly, looking down at his highly expensive shoes. I turned my cold, unforgiving gaze back to my highly pathetic brother. And yet, my little brother here, the absolute golden boy of the entire family, is aggressively walking around bragging about being a senior associate. He is loudly bragging about paying for this incredibly expensive, lavish dinner tonight. But we both absolutely know the real truth, don't we, Donovan? Donovan slowly opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely nothing came out. He was completely, entirely trapped in a web of his own massive lies. "The absolute truth," I continued, aggressively raising my voice slightly so it loudly echoed off the massive glass windows, "is that you are actively drowning in massive, unrecoverable credit card debt. You cheaply rented that highly ill-fitting suit you are currently wearing. You have absolute zero actual savings in the bank. And the absolute only reason you brought our highly gullible parents to this highly specific restaurant tonight was to desperately, pathetically try and convince Mr. Harrington here to quickly approve a massive, highly risky personal loan to bail out your pathetic, completely failing lifestyle. You are a complete fraud. My mother let out a loud, highly dramatic, absolutely piercing sob. She collapsed heavily into one of the highly expensive dining chairs, aggressively covering her face with her shaking hands. Julian, please stop it. Please, just stop it right now. You are completely ruining absolutely everything in front of our highly important friends. I am absolutely not ruining anything, Mother. I shot back, my voice entirely devoid of any sympathy or love. I am simply highly effectively exposing the massive, hollow lie you have all been aggressively, happily living for the past 3 years. You threw me away like absolute garbage because you desperately wanted to completely align yourselves with a winner. You actively chose the golden boy because he looked highly successful on paper. Well, read the highly legal paperwork now. I aggressively reached into the inner pocket of my custom suit jacket. I pulled out a heavy, thick, legally folded document. I aggressively threw it onto the absolute center of the mahogany table. It landed with a loud, highly satisfying smack right next to the crystal centerpieces. That is the final, highly legally binding eviction notice for Harrison and Associates, I announced extremely coldly. I was originally going to wait until Monday morning to have the armed city sheriffs completely lock the building doors and fully seize all your highly valuable corporate assets. But since you were all so incredibly eager to brutally insult me on the front steps of my own highly valuable property tonight, I figured I would happily deliver it personally. Harrison aggressively rushed forward, his hands violently shaking as he picked up the thick legal document. He quickly, desperately scanned the first page, his face turning entirely white. Julian, please, I beg you. We have dozens of highly loyal employees. We have massive, highly active legal cases. If you lock us out, we are utterly ruined. We will formally file for corporate bankruptcy by Tuesday morning. That sounds like a highly severe, completely personal problem, Harrison? I said completely flatly. You absolutely should have managed your firm's corporate finances much better. Or perhaps you absolutely should not have aggressively promoted an arrogant, entirely useless fraud like Donovan just because he loudly talks a big game to clients. Clara, who had been terrifyingly silent the entire time, suddenly stepped aggressively forward. She aggressively shoved Donovan far away from her. She looked at me with highly wild, completely desperate, aggressively greedy eyes. Julian, Clara said, her voice violently shaking with completely fake emotion. Julian, I swear I had absolutely no idea. They completely lied to me. Donovan aggressively lied to me about his massive finances. He completely, emotionally manipulated me into leaving you. I never, ever actually wanted to end our highly beautiful engagement. I have deeply missed you every single day for the past 3 grueling years. It was the absolute most disgusting, highly pathetic display of sheer, unadulterated greed I had ever witnessed in my entire adult life. She was highly willing to completely throw her husband directly under the bus in a split second the absolute moment she realized I had millions of dollars. I looked at Clara, feeling absolutely nothing but pure, highly undiluted disgust. Clara, do not absolutely insult my intelligence. You brutally left me because I was working in a hot kitchen and did not have a massive, highly funded 401k or an expensive country club membership to offer you. You actively chased the highly fake illusion of easy money. Well, you completely caught it. And now you get to happily sink straight to the bottom of the ocean with the ship. I highly deliberately reached into my coat pocket one final time. I pulled out the small, extremely heavy velvet box. I walked slowly over to where my mother was openly sobbing loudly at the table. I gently, highly carefully placed the box right in front of her. Happy birthday, Mother, I said quietly. She looked up at me through her massive tears, her expensive makeup highly ruined. She slowly, carefully opened the box with highly trembling fingers. She saw the shiny, highly heavy keys sitting directly on the dark velvet cushion. Those are the actual keys to a highly luxury, multi-million-dollar lakefront cabin in the highly exclusive Hamptons. I aggressively explained loudly, absolutely making sure every single person in the room heard me clearly. I bought it completely, fully in cash under a corporate holding company. It has a highly private boat dock, a massive, fully stocked wine cellar, and a beautiful, highly expensive wraparound deck overlooking the water. I bought it specifically intending to generously give it to you and Dad for your peaceful retirement. My father, Richard, stared deeply at the shiny keys. His large hands were violently, uncontrollably shaking. Tears were actively welling up in his eyes, finally realizing the massive, unimaginable wealth and absolute security he had completely, foolishly thrown away out of pure, arrogant, highly misguided spite. I bought it, I continued, my voice cold as absolute ice, before you publicly, brutally humiliated me at Thanksgiving, before you actively, aggressively helped Donovan steal my beautiful fiancée, before you loudly told me I was a massive, completely irredeemable failure. I reached out, aggressively snatched the velvet box right off the table, and snapped it shut with a loud, highly final click. I smoothly slipped it back into my pocket. But you do absolutely not get to live in my highly expensive houses, I stated with absolute, highly undeniable finality. You do not get to eagerly eat in my luxury restaurants. You do not get to benefit in any way from the massive multi-million-dollar empire I built directly out of the absolute, highly devastating ruins of the life you aggressively destroyed. I turned completely around and looked directly at Victor and Marcel, who were standing highly quietly near the door, witnessing the entire, highly incredible scene unfold. Marcel, I ordered firmly, completely cancel the exclusive tasting menu immediately. Tell the highly trained kitchen staff to completely clear this entire room right now. These specific people are absolutely no longer welcome in any Meridian property, ever again, for the rest of their natural lives. I did not wait for their highly dramatic reaction. I walked straight out of the room, leaving them sitting in the completely devastating, entirely self-inflicted ruins of their completely highly shattered lives. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The immediate, highly chaotic aftermath of the Wellington room confrontation was an absolute, completely unmitigated disaster for my entire toxic family. The brutal fallout was incredibly swift, highly destructive, and completely highly public. Word travels incredibly fast in the highly connected circles of high society, and their highly inflated reputation was completely, permanently destroyed in a single evening. I walked out to the expansive, highly private outdoor terrace of the restaurant to get some much-needed fresh air. The freezing cold city wind felt incredibly refreshing against my face. I pulled out a highly expensive imported cigar, carefully lit it, and looked out over the massive, sprawling skyline that I now firmly held a significant, highly lucrative piece of. A few quiet minutes later, the heavy glass terrace door slowly, loudly creaked open. Donovan walked out onto the patio. He looked absolutely, completely terrible. He was physically, uncontrollably shaking in the freezing air. His rented tie was completely undone, and his cheap rented suit jacket was hanging awkwardly off his shoulders. He looked exactly like a completely, utterly broken man who had just lost absolutely everything. He slowly, heavily walked over to the thick glass railing, standing a few awkward feet away from me. He did not dare look at me directly in the eyes. He stared completely blankly out at the bright, highly intimidating city lights below. They completely fired me, Julian, Donovan said. His voice was completely, entirely hollow, totally drained of its usual highly arrogant bravado. Harrison completely fired me right there in the private dining room, directly in front of Mom and Dad. He loudly told me to entirely clear out my desk tonight before the massive, highly public eviction happens tomorrow morning. My legal career is completely, permanently over. No corporate law firm in this entire, massive city will ever highly hire me after a highly public disaster like this. My entire life is completely over. I took a slow, highly deliberate drag from my expensive cigar. I smoothly exhaled the thick smoke slowly into the cold night air. I did not feel a single, highly solitary ounce of pity for him. Actions have severe, highly unavoidable consequences. Donovan. You aggressively played a very stupid, highly arrogant game for years, and you finally, completely lost absolutely everything. I am completely, financially ruined, he whispered, heavy tears finally streaming rapidly down his face. Clara aggressively told me she is aggressively filing for a high-conflict, highly messy divorce first thing tomorrow morning. She loudly said she absolutely refuses to be married to an unemployed, completely broke, massive failure. She completely, loudly screamed at me in the elevator on the way down to the crowded lobby. Everyone heard her. That is exactly what you intentionally married, I replied coldly, looking at him with utter, highly unadulterated disdain. You married a highly shallow, aggressively greedy, completely toxic woman who only ever cared about the massive financial bottom line. You actually thought she genuinely loved you? She highly loved the massive, entirely fake illusion of wealth you aggressively sold her. And the absolute second the money completely dried up, she aggressively bolted. You absolutely, entirely deserve each other. Donovan suddenly fell heavily to his knees on the freezing cold concrete floor. He aggressively grabbed the expensive fabric of my custom suit pants, openly, highly pathetically sobbing. Julian, please, I am begging you on my knees. Do not completely evict the law firm tomorrow. Talk to Harrison. Save my career. I will do absolutely anything. I will publicly apologize to everyone. I will completely scrub the floors in your highly busy kitchens. Please, you are my older brother. You have to absolutely help me. I looked down at the highly pathetic, deeply groveling man openly sobbing at my feet. The absolute golden child. The highly praised star athlete. The highly arrogant lawyer who had completely, ruthlessly destroyed my life 3 grueling years ago without a single solitary second of hesitation or highly genuine remorse. I aggressively, violently yanked my leg entirely back, completely breaking his weak, pathetic grip. Get up, Donovan, I commanded extremely sharply. Have some basic, highly necessary human dignity. I am absolutely not saving your failing firm, and I am definitely, completely not saving you. I am completely, entirely done being your massive financial safety net. I turned my back on him entirely and walked confidently back toward the heavy glass doors. But before I went fully inside, I stopped abruptly and looked back over my shoulder. By the way, I said highly casually, expertly delivering the final, highly fatal blow to his entirely shattered reality. Since you are suddenly so incredibly, highly interested in our family's massive finances, you should probably heavily question Mom and Dad about their massive retirement accounts. And their highly massive, unpaid mortgage. Donovan slowly, highly painfully looked up. His deeply tear-streaked face completely twisted in deep, highly terrified confusion. What are you even talking about? They own their house. I smiled completely coldly. Did they never actively tell you? In order to fully pay for your incredibly expensive, highly prestigious law school, and to fully fund your highly lavish, completely fake corporate lifestyle in the city so you could desperately impress Clara, they secretly took out a massive, highly risky second mortgage on the family house. They completely, entirely drained their entire 401k retirement accounts. They are hundreds of thousands of dollars in deep, entirely unrecoverable debt. And since you just completely lost your massive salary, they are absolutely going to default on the massive bank loans within 60 days. They are going to completely lose the family house, Donovan. Because of your highly selfish greed. I left him completely, entirely paralyzed on the freezing terrace, loudly screaming in absolute, unadulterated horror as the full, highly devastating reality of his entirely selfish actions finally, completely crushed him. Later that exact same, highly dramatic night, as I was walking confidently through the grand lobby to finally leave my busy restaurant, Clara suddenly aggressively ambushed me near the coat check. She had clearly been frantically waiting in the dark shadows. She looked highly frantic, completely, entirely desperate, and highly pathetic. She aggressively grabbed my arm tightly. "Julian, wait, please. Just give me 5 quick minutes to completely explain absolutely everything. We can completely, easily fix this. We can happily start over right now. I know you still deeply love me deep down. We can finally have the beautiful, highly wealthy life we always planned together." I looked at the hand gripping my highly expensive jacket. I slowly, deliberately reached up and completely, aggressively peeled her highly desperate fingers off my arm, aggressively dropping her hand like it was something completely, highly diseased. "Clara," I said, my voice dangerously low and completely, entirely lethal. "If you ever approach me, contact me, or speak to me again, my highly aggressive, entirely ruthless corporate legal team will completely, entirely bury you in so many massive harassment lawsuits you will absolutely not be able to afford a simple cardboard box to live in. You are completely, entirely dead to me. Now get out of my building right now before I have my highly trained security physically throw you onto the freezing street." She completely burst into highly hysterical, loud, completely fake tears, but I did not stop walking. I walked straight out the massive glass doors, got directly into my warm Porsche, and drove rapidly away from the highly toxic wreckage of my dark past without looking in the rearview mirror even a single time. Exactly 3 highly productive months later, the heavy, dark, completely suffocating storm had finally passed, completely clearing the air in my new life. I was standing proudly on the expansive, beautifully decorated outdoor patio of my newest, highly ambitious restaurant venture. It was a massive, absolutely stunning property located right on the beautiful, highly expensive waterfront. The highly anticipated grand opening was completely sold out, entirely packed with highly influential investors, loyal friends, and highly dedicated, hardworking staff who had fully become my true, completely chosen family over the brutal, highly challenging years. The severe, highly unavoidable consequences I had set in motion that dramatic night at Meridian Heights had completely, irreversibly played out exactly as I brilliantly predicted. Harrison and Associates had been formally, highly publicly evicted from my downtown commercial tower. The law firm entirely dissolved 2 short weeks later, frantically filing for massive corporate bankruptcy. Donovan was completely, entirely blacklisted in the city's highly competitive legal community. He was currently working a highly stressful, entirely low-paying administrative desk job at a tiny, highly depressing firm 2 hours away, desperately struggling to make his minimum monthly credit card payments. Clara had brutally, entirely ruthlessly divorced him. She aggressively tried to take half of his assets in court, only to highly embarrassingly realize in mediation that he actually had absolutely 0 assets to legally take. She was now highly miserably living back in her cramped, tiny childhood bedroom at her parents' house, completely miserable and constantly, highly obsessively checking my highly successful corporate social media accounts. And my toxic parents, Richard and Beatrice. They completely lost the massive, beautiful suburban house they had raised me in. The commercial bank officially foreclosed on the expensive property after they completely missed 3 highly consecutive massive mortgage payments. They were entirely forced to completely downsize, moving into a tiny, highly depressing 2-bedroom apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood. They had frantically written me dozens of long, highly desperate letters, endlessly begging for immediate financial forgiveness, desperately begging for money, heavily begging for me to let them move into one of my highly luxury properties. I never opened a single one of their pathetic letters. I immediately instructed my highly efficient assistant to run them straight through the heavy-duty paper shredder. Forgiveness is a highly personal, deeply complex choice. It absolutely does not mean you have to completely invite highly toxic, deeply abusive people back into your peaceful, highly successful life. It simply means you finally choose to let go of the heavy, completely suffocating anger that is actively poisoning your own heart. I did not intensely hate my toxic family anymore. I simply felt absolutely nothing for them. They were completely strangers who happened to share my DNA. I had officially, permanently cut the heavy anchor, and I was finally entirely free to aggressively sail forward. Standing on that beautiful, highly expensive patio, holding a glass of highly expensive vintage champagne, I looked around at the incredible, massive empire I had built entirely from scratch. I had successfully transformed my deepest, darkest, entirely unbearable pain into absolute, completely undeniable power. I had taken the brutal, highly heavy stones they aggressively threw at me and expertly used them to completely build an entirely impenetrable, highly lucrative fortress. Victor, my massive, highly loyal head of security, walked up quietly beside me, quietly handing me a highly detailed corporate report on our massive upcoming West Coast expansion. "Everything is completely secure, boss," Victor said quietly, a rare, highly genuine smile entirely crossing his tough face. "The corporate investors are incredibly happy with the massive numbers." "Thank you, Victor," I said, lightly clinking my heavy crystal glass against his. "For absolutely everything. We did this." I fully realized in that exact, completely peaceful moment that true, highly lasting success is absolutely not just about having a massive, overflowing bank account or a towering, highly valuable real estate portfolio. True, undeniable success is absolutely knowing your own deep, entirely undeniable worth when the entire world is aggressively trying to completely convince you that you are nothing. It is entirely about firmly setting absolute ironclad boundaries and fiercely, aggressively protecting your inner peace at all absolute costs. No one has the absolute right to completely, repeatedly disrespect you, especially not the highly toxic people who boldly, entirely falsely claim to love you. Blood absolutely does not automatically give anyone a highly toxic free pass to completely, entirely abuse you. So, listen to me very carefully today. If you are currently standing completely alone in the dark, highly suffocating shadows of your own deeply toxic family, constantly feeling totally unappreciated, deeply mocked, or entirely overlooked, please know this fundamental truth. Your current, highly painful environment absolutely does not dictate your ultimate, highly boundless potential. You have the immense, absolute, entirely undeniable power to completely walk away from the toxic table where basic respect is absolutely no longer being served. You can absolutely, successfully build your own massive table. And trust me, the food tastes infinitely better when you own the entire restaurant. Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own highly toxic family? Have you ever had to completely cut ties with the highly toxic people who were supposed to fiercely protect you? Share your personal story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and actively subscribe so you don't miss the very next journey.